At its peak in 1990, there were roughly 31,000 specialty video rental stores in the United States, more than a bank on every corner, more than a dry cleaner in every strip mall, and considerably more loved than either. Today, the independent video store is functionally extinct. The reason most people give is streaming. The future arrived. The past couldn't adapt. That's not what happened. What killed the independent video store was a set of secret contracts signed in 1997 and 1998 that let one corporation buy new release VHS tapes for $4 apiece, while every mom and pop in America still paid $75. More than 4,000 stores went under in 3 years. Federal antitrust enforcers held a law that arguably prohibited exactly this. They chose not to use it. This is the story of how that ecosystem worked. The Friday night ritual, the clerk who changed your taste in movies, the $70 cassette that determined whether a small business lived or died, and the corporate playbook that turned all of it into a parking lot. Chapter 1. The Beaded Curtain and the Rewinder. You remember the parking lot first, a strip mall usually, the video store wedged between a pizza place and a nail salon, or a laundromat and a State Farm office. The sign out front was hand-painted or backlit plastic, something like Video Village or Movie Time, or just the owner's last name plus video. You pulled in on a Friday around 6:30, and the lot was already filling up. Minivans, a couple of teenagers in a used Camaro, a dad with 2 kids hanging off his arm, negotiating before they'd even crossed the threshold. The door had a bell, sometimes electronic, sometimes a real brass bell on a spring. Inside, the carpet was commercial grade, the kind that held popcorn crumbs and the faint chemical memory of every spilled soda since the Reagan administration. The lighting was fluorescent, bright enough to read the back of a VHS case, but never quite bright enough to feel like a store. It felt more like someone's overstocked basement, which in the early days it often literally was. The new release wall faced the door. Every store ran some version of it. A theater lobby-style display of the week's big titles, face out, the cover art doing the selling. If Top Gun had just hit rental, there might be 5 copies on the wall. If all 5 were out, and on a Friday night they usually were, the empty sleeves stayed up, and you knew you were too late. That was the transaction's first negotiation, what you came for versus what was left. Behind the new releases, the store opened into genre sections, action and adventure, sci-fi, comedy, drama, horror, kids and family, foreign, usually a single shelf near the back. And in most independents, though never in the chain that would eventually kill them, an adult section behind a beaded curtain or a frosted glass partition with a felt letterboard sign reading Adults Only, 21 and Over. In 1985, adult titles accounted for roughly 13% of the national video market, trailing only adventure and sci-fi. That curtain was an architectural feature of the American strip mall, and its deliberate absence from one particular chain would later become a marketing weapon. The counter held the membership cards, paper at first, then plastic, barcoded by the late 80s, always requiring proof of address and usually a credit card on file, not for payment, but for insurance against the tape that never came back. The popcorn machine sat near the register, free or a quarter, the smell calibrated, whether the owner knew it or not. To extend your visit by another 10 minutes, candy racks, a soda cooler, the impulse buys that padded margins the rental side couldn't always cover. And the sound, the mechanical clack of the rewinder behind the counter, the store's heartbeat, running constantly on a busy night because half the tapes came back unrewound despite the sticker on every cassette pleading otherwise. Be kind, rewind. The fee for ignoring it was usually $1. The satisfying snap of a clamshell case, the rustle of the plastic security sleeve. These were the ambient sounds of a Friday night that roughly 68% of American households participated in by 1990. $10.5 billion a year in rental revenue. An entire economy built on the fact that a movie studio couldn't stop you from renting a tape you'd legally bought. That legal fact, the one that made all of this possible, was an accident. And Hollywood spent the better part of a decade trying to kill it. Chapter 2. The Accident That Built an Industry. The first sale doctrine is one of those legal principles that shaped an entire American industry while most Americans never learned its name. codified at 17 U.S.C. Section 109A and traceable to a 1908 Supreme Court case called Bobbs-Merrill v. Strauss. The rule is simple. Once you've lawfully purchased a copy of a copyrighted work, you can rent it, lend it, or resell it without the copyright holder's permission. You own the physical object. The studio owns the intellectual property. Those are different things. Hollywood loathed this. Studios spent the early 1980s lobbying Congress to carve video cassettes out of first sale protection, the same way Congress would later carve out music recordings and computer software. In March 1982, Senate legislation was introduced that would have required studio authorization for every rental. The video store industry, barely 5 years old, mobilized. On October 21, 1983, stores across the country closed for several hours in coordinated protest. The Video Software Dealers Association, founded in November 1981 specifically to fight the carve-out, organized the counterattack. On January 17, 1984, the Supreme Court decided Sony versus Universal City Studios 5-4, ruling home VCR, recording a fair use. Home video survived, and the rental industry it underwrote was now legally bulletproof. The founding myth goes like this. In 1977, George Atkinson opened the video station on Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles. Membership was $50 a year or $100 for a lifetime. Rentals were $10 a night. More than 1,000 people pre-registered from a single Los Angeles Times ad. By mid-1985, roughly 15,000 specialty video rental stores operated in the United States, with another tier of grocery stores, drugstores, and convenience stores renting tapes on the side, sometimes as loss leaders for as little as 49 cents. The economics of those early stores were brutal and beautiful, and they ran on a single number that determined whether an independent owner made money or went broke. That number was the wholesale price of a VHS tape, and it was set deliberately and strategically by the studios themselves. Chapter 3. $70 for a cassette. A new release VHS tape cost an independent retailer between $65 and $100 wholesale. That wasn't an accident. Studios had set the price explicitly to capture value from the rental businesses that first sale allowed, but Hollywood couldn't prevent. By the mid-1980s, the standard rental tier suggested retail was $69.95 to $79.95, with some titles topping $89.95. Here's the arithmetic every independent owner ran. A new release rental cost the customer $3 to $4 a night. At $4, you needed somewhere between 18 and 25 rentals on a single cassette just to break even, before you counted rent, payroll, electricity, insurance, and the carpet under your customer's feet. A hit title might turn that many times in its first few months. A mid-tier release might take a year. A flop might never get there. Capital constraints meant a typical independent store stocked 3 to 5 copies of a hot new release. If 30 customers wanted Top Gun on a Friday night, 25 went home with something else, or nothing at all. That gap between demand and supply was the structural frustration of the entire industry. It was also, as it turned out, the vulnerability that a corporation in Dallas would later exploit to destroy everybody else. Studios even policed the pricing tiers visually. Disney's home video division shipped rental copies in blue cases and sell-through copies, the ones priced for consumers to buy and keep, usually at $19.95 or $29.95, in white cases. Company lawyers monitored dealer compliance and sued under trademark law where first sale blocked copyright claims. 20th Century Fox used black clamshell cases for rentals and colorful packaging for sell-through. Columbia Pictures tested red cassettes for rental and black for sell-through. The two-tier pricing system wasn't just an economic arrangement. It was a visual regime, color-coded and legally enforced, and 30,000 American small businesses balanced on top of it. Underneath those stores sat an entire distribution ecosystem that almost no customer ever saw. Ingram Entertainment, founded in 1981 in Laverne, Tennessee, became the largest national distributor. Alongside Baker & Taylor, video products distributors, Major Video Concepts out of Indianapolis, and a handful of smaller rack jobbers, these wholesalers supplied the independent rental base. Their lobbying body, the National Association of Video Distributors, met annually with studio executives at Indian Wells, California to coordinate Tuesday street dates and release schedules. When the kill shot came, it wouldn't just hollow out the stores. It would hollow out this entire middle layer of the American entertainment economy: the distributors, the truck routes, the warehouse workers, the sales reps who knew every store owner in their territory by first name. But before the decline, there was a peak. And at that peak, the independent video store wasn't just a business, it was a cultural institution with a staff that functioned, improbably, as America's largest informal film school. Chapter 4. The Clerk Who Changed Your Life. The movie nerd clerk wasn't a stereotype, it was a job description. Quentin Tarantino worked at video archives in Manhattan Beach, California, from roughly 1985 to 1989, alongside Roger Avery, Craig Heyman, and Daniel Snyder. The store was owned by Rick Humbert and Lance Lawson. Avery later said it was less a video store than a film school. Tarantino told Rolling Stone it was the best video store in the Los Angeles area, LA's answer to the Cahiers du Cinéma. When Video Archives closed in 1995, Tarantino bought the entire VHS inventory and shelving. Avery took the laser discs. 3 decades later, their Video Archives podcast, launched in 2022, now recording in a 20-seat theater inside Tarantino's Vista Hollywood, is essentially the two of them recreating those arguments with the rule that no movie qualifies unless they own it on physical media. Kevin Smith worked at a convenience store and adjoining video rental shop at 58 to 60 Leonard Avenue in Leonardo, New Jersey. He shot Clerks there at night for $27,575 while the stores were closed. That film was added to the National Film Registry in 2019. Joe Swanberg told the writer Tom Roston that renting the Coens' Raising Arizona was the moment he realized not all movies are made by Steven Spielberg and star Tom Hanks. David O. Russell said he memorized a 30-minute sequence of Chinatown from a rented VHS. That's how he taught himself filmmaking. These weren't isolated stories. They were the product of an infrastructure. Across the country, independent video stores with deep catalogs and passionate staff were doing something no algorithm has ever replicated, putting unexpected films into the hands of people who didn't know they wanted them. Scarecrow Video in Seattle, founded in 1988 by Greek immigrant George Latsios, grew toward 148,000 titles, the largest publicly available collection in the country. Kim's Video in Manhattan, founded by Youngman Kim around 1986, built 6 locations around 55,000 titles and 250,000 members, with staff dispatched to international film festivals and foreign embassies to track down films that had never been legally released in the United States. Vidiots in Santa Monica, La Video in San Francisco, Facets in Chicago, which Roger Ebert called a temple of great cinema. Movie Madness in Portland, where Mike Clark opened on April 12, 1991, with 2,000 tapes and eventually grew to 84,000. Video Americane in Baltimore, immortalized in John Waters' Serial Mom. Vulcan Video and I Love Video in Austin. 4-Star Video in Madison. Video headquarters in Keene, New Hampshire, whose owner Ken McAleer was named the VSDA's Video Retailer of the Year in 1997. Each of these stores was a node in a national cinephile infrastructure. Each one employed clerks who could walk you from the new release wall to the foreign section and hand you something that would rearrange your understanding of what a movie could be. The Friday night ritual was so reliable it became a cliché only in retrospect. Family minivans in suburban parking lots. Teenagers on first dates negotiating between his horror pick and her romantic comedy. Latchkey kids walking themselves down for a Saturday morning tape. By 1990, roughly 90% of the country's 31,000 specialty video stores were independents, not franchises or chains. The industry generated $10.5 billion annually, and that same year, the chain that would destroy most of them had already opened its 1,200th store. Chapter 5. The Man from Dallas. David Cook was not a movie person. He ran Cook Data Services, founded in 1978 in Dallas to supply computerized inventory and database software to the oil and gas industry. When the oil market collapsed mid-decade, Cook needed a pivot. His wife Sandy, a serious moviegoer who'd spent months researching the fragmented video rental landscape, pointed him at video. He briefly considered joining a Dallas franchise called VideoWorks and allegedly walked out only when they refused his preferred blue and yellow color scheme. The first Blockbuster Video opened October 19, 1985 on Skillman Street in Dallas. It carried 8,000 VHS tapes and 2,000 beta tapes across roughly 6,500 titles, many times larger than the typical independent. 3 structural innovations, all derived from Cook's database background, became competitive weapons. The first was a computerized point-of-sale and inventory system with barcoded tapes and barcoded membership cards, at a moment when most independents still tracked rentals on index cards. The second was the superstore format, tapes openly displayed on shelves like a bookstore, letting customers browse and impulse rent at a pace no cramped independent could match. The third was a deliberate, family-friendly, no pornography policy designed to make the brand acceptable in suburban strip malls and to neutralize the video store as seedy reputation that newspaper editorials had spent years building against independents. By 1987, Cook had 19 stores, and then Cook was out. A trio of investors assembled by former Waste Management executive John Melk, Wayne Huizenga, Waste Management's co-founder, and the head of what was then America's largest garbage company, Melk himself, and Chicago businessman Scott Beck, bought a controlling stake. Cook departed within months. Huizenga moved headquarters to Fort Lauderdale and brought Waste Management's roll-up playbook to video rental, identify the dominant regional operator, swallow it whole, eliminate competition rather than compete with it. The growth pace from there is one of the most extreme in American retail history. 19 stores at the end of 1986, 133 by the end of 1987, 415 by the end of 1988, already the largest video chain in the country, more than 1,000 by the end of 1989, 1,200 by mid-1990, at which point the trade press reported a pace of 1 new store every single day. By 1992, the number was approaching 2,800, and the pace had been described as every 24 hours. By 1998, 6,000. By November 2004, the absolute peak, 9,094 locations worldwide, 84,000 employees, $5.9 billion in annual revenue. The acquisition list reads like a kill list. Southern Video Partnership in March 1987. Movies to Go in St. Louis for $14.5 million 2 months later. Major Video in Las Vegas, the nation's 4th largest chain, for $92.5 million in January 1989. And in November 1990, the deal that broke the East Coast, Erol's Incorporated, founded by Turkish immigrant Erol Onaran, as a TV repair shop in Arlington, Virginia in 1963, and grown into the nation's 3rd largest chain with more than 200 stores across 5 states. Blockbuster paid $40 million. Onaran's grandson later remembered, by the late 80s, the industry had changed, and a family-run business was unable to compete with the big public chains. Then the apex predator was itself swallowed. In September 1994, Sumner Redstone's Viacom acquired Blockbuster for approximately $8.4 billion in stock, primarily to use Blockbuster's enormous cash flow to finance Viacom's bidding war for Paramount. Within 3 years, Blockbuster's estimated value had fallen to $4.6 billion. Cash flow dropped 70% in the second quarter of 1997. The chain was wounded. Independents improbably were gaining market share again, and then someone in a Dallas office had an idea that would finish them off for good. Chapter 6. $4 a tape. John Antioco came from Taco Bell. He was named Blockbuster's CEO in July 1997, and his mandate was to fix the chain's most embarrassing internal problem, a problem executives had given a remarkably honest name. They called it managed dissatisfaction. Here's what that meant. Blockbuster, like every other video retailer in America, was paying $65 to $75 per cassette wholesale. Even a flagship store couldn't afford to stock more than 30 copies of a Friday night hit. By 8 o'clock, every copy of Liar Liar was gone. Customers drove to Blockbuster, walked the new release wall, found nothing but empty sleeves, and left. The chain's own research showed this was happening millions of times a year. They'd given the frustration a name, built it into their projections, and decided to live with it. Antioco decided not to live with it. But his solution wasn't innovation. It was leverage. Beginning in late 1997 and rolling out fully through 1998, Blockbuster signed direct revenue-sharing contracts with every major Hollywood studio, Paramount, Buena Vista, Columbia TriStar, Universal, and 20th Century Fox. The terms were simple, and they were devastating. Instead of paying $65 per cassette up front, Blockbuster would pay roughly $3 to $8 per tape, most commonly cited at $4, and share 30 to 45% of every rental dollar back to the studio over the tape's lifetime, with minimum revenue guarantees pegged to Blockbuster's market share. Wharton professors Gérard Cachon and Martin Larivière documented the model in their canonical 1999 study and calculated the retailer was paying around $8 a tape and returning half the revenue. A Solomon Smith Barney analyst worked out that minimum guarantees amounted to roughly $30 to $35 per cassette, flowing back to the studios, still less than half what an independent paid at wholesale, and Blockbuster kept 60% of every rental dollar on top. Think about what that means at store level. The independent down the street is buying a new release VHS through Ingram or Baker & Taylor at $75 a copy. She can afford 4 copies of Armageddon. The Blockbuster 3 blocks away is buying the same tape for $4. It can stack 100 copies on the wall, and the customer, your customer, the one who's been coming to your store every Friday for 6 years, drives past your parking lot, sees Blockbuster's "Guaranteed to Be There" banner, and pulls in there instead. Not because the service is better, not because the selection is deeper, because the movie she wants is actually on the shelf. Antiocho's 1998 marketing campaign made the execution public. Television ads fronted by comedian Richard Lewis promised customers they'd go home happy. The Blockbuster guarantee, later rebranded Guaranteed to Be There, pledged that if the advertised title wasn't in stock, the customer got it free next time. In test market reconfigurations, up to a quarter of the new release wall, 28 linear feet in one Tampa prototype, was devoted to 4 guaranteed titles. Test market rentals rose as much as 75%. Blockbuster's national market share climbed from 25% in 1997 to 31% in 1998 and would reach 40% by 2001. Cash flow rose 61% in a single year. Were independents offered similar terms? No. This is the center of the story, and the answer was blunt. Studios contracted directly with Blockbuster. Independents could only buy through distributors at traditional wholesale pricing. Doug Tolini of the Video Update chain attacked the asymmetry from the floor of the July 1998 VSDA convention in Las Vegas, arguing that Blockbuster's advantage came purely from its direct sales relationship with the major studios, while independent retailers couldn't enjoy the same discount because they could only purchase product through distributors. The supposed alternative was a system called Rentrack, a paper transaction model pioneered in 1986 by Ron Berger of National Video. Under Rentrack, independents paid $7 to $12 per tape up front and split revenue roughly 45% retailer, 45% studio, 10% Rentrack. But Rentrack only offered a limited slate of studios, didn't deliver frontline major titles on terms remotely comparable to Blockbuster's bilateral deals, and saddled independents with minimum guarantee structures that made the economics far worse for a small volume store. In March 1999, Blockbuster itself signed on with Rentrack for selected titles, confirmation that even the supposedly independent-friendly system ultimately depended on the dominant chain. The VSDA tried. In 2000, the trade body's Independent Retailers Council organized what it called the most important project VSDA has undertaken, a revenue-sharing test among 50 independent stores. President Bo Anderson publicly demanded equal access to copy depth on economic terms that make sense for independents. At the 2000 convention, independent owners wore red baseball caps reading "Protect Our Window." None of it mattered. The studios had made their choice. The window was already closing. The distributor ecosystem that had supplied 30,000 stores, Ingram, Baker & Taylor, video products distributors, the rack jobbers, the truck routes, the warehouse workers, lost its economic foundation when Blockbuster bypassed it entirely and dealt directly with the studios. Those companies didn't just lose one customer, they lost the customer whose volume had kept the entire wholesale infrastructure viable. When Blockbuster went direct, the cost per unit for every remaining distributor customer went up because the fixed costs of the distribution network were now spread across a shrinking base. The kill shot didn't just hit the stores, it hollowed out the entire middle layer of the American video economy exactly as the economics predicted it would. Chapter 7, $1,400 a year. The Institute for Local Self-Reliance, citing the National Association of Video Distributors, documented the body count. Between 1998 and 2001, more than 4,100 independent video retailers went out of business. That's roughly 1,400 closures per year, nearly 4 stores a day, every day for 3 years, during the peak of Blockbuster's revenue-sharing advantage. The geographic predation was deliberate. Stacy Mitchell of the ILSR wrote in November 2000 that a common Blockbuster strategy was to open a new store within a few blocks of a successful independent and undercut prices until the local store was forced to close, after which prices tended to rise once the competition had been eliminated. Christopher Bach, owner of Music Stop Movie Time in Cedarburg, Wisconsin, told USA Today that Blockbuster was charging as much as $5 per rental in markets where it had achieved a virtual monopoly. The playbook was textbook predatory pricing, the same pattern Walmart had perfected in small-town retail a decade earlier, now applied to entertainment. 2 major class actions tried to hold the line. In the Texas federal case filed in San Antonio in 2001, 3 independent plaintiffs, Lone Star Videotronics, Phoenix Merchant Investments, and the Big Picture Video, sued Blockbuster, Viacom, and units of 5 major studios under the Sherman Act and Robinson-Patman Act. Lead attorney Harry Munsinger told reporters, "All we want is the return of that level playing field." Class certification was denied. The judge dismissed on the merits. The Fifth Circuit affirmed. The California state case was the closer call. Approximately 250 independent video retailers sued Blockbuster, Viacom, Sumner Redstone personally, and 5 studios under California's Cartwright Act and Unfair Practices Act, which specifically prohibits secret rebates, unearned discounts, and the secret extension of special privileges. The trial court granted summary judgment to the defendants. But on appeal in November 2005, the Second District Court of Appeal partially revived the case. The court's central finding cut directly to the heart of the matter. If a purchaser has no choice but to buy on fundamentally different terms, because the terms given to the favored purchaser are neither available to nor known by the disfavored purchaser, then some form of price discrimination may have occurred. The California Attorney General's office filed a brief supporting the independents, arguing the studios could have offered them terms similar to Blockbuster's. But by the time the case returned to the trial court, Blockbuster was already in financial collapse, and the litigation faded into the wreckage. The Robinson-Patman Act, the obvious federal vehicle for challenging discriminatory pricing of this magnitude, had been effectively abandoned by federal antitrust enforcers since the 1980s. The FTC filed 0 Robinson-Patman complaints during the George H.W. Bush administration and 1 during the Clinton administration. The law was on the books. Enforcement had simply been turned off. The VSDA itself, the trade body founded in 1981 specifically to defend independence against Hollywood, collapsed under the contradiction of representing both the mom and pop owners and the chain that was destroying them. In April 2006, it merged with the Interactive Entertainment Merchants Association. The new organization was called the Entertainment Merchants Association. The word video had been quietly removed. The independent base it was founded to protect had largely ceased to exist. Mike Clark, who opened Movie Madness in Portland on April 12, 1991, later put the scale of the disappearance in a single sentence. "When I first opened up, there were 50 video stores within a 5-mile radius. By the time he said that, he was one of the only ones left." Chapter 8. The Asteroid. The chain that weaponized managed dissatisfaction against its customers and predatory pricing against its competitors turned out to be constitutionally incapable of doing the one thing that might have saved it, sharing value with someone else. In September 2000, Reed Hastings, Mark Randolph, and Netflix CFO Barry McCarthy flew to Blockbuster's Dallas headquarters. They offered Antioco 49% of Netflix, or the whole company, for $50 million. According to Randolph's 2019 memoir, Antioco declined, dismissing Netflix as a niche operation and the dot-com moment as overblown. Antioco has since disputed the characterization. He says the meeting was polite and the deal simply didn't work on their terms. The substantive outcome is not in dispute. Netflix's market capitalization now ranges in the hundreds of billions. Blockbuster became a parking lot. But Netflix didn't kill Blockbuster. Blockbuster was already dying of wounds inflicted by its own corporate parent. When Viacom spun off the chain in 2004, it forced a $5 per share special dividend that required Blockbuster to take a $905 million loan to make the payment. Sumner Redstone's parting gift to the company he'd bought for $8.4 billion was the debt load that made competing in the digital transition functionally impossible. Hastings later observed that without their debt, Blockbuster could have killed Netflix. John Antioco, to his credit, saw what was coming. In January 2005, he eliminated late fees, which had been generating nearly $800 million a year, roughly 16% of total revenue, and launched Blockbuster Online to compete directly with Netflix's DVD-by-mail service. Blockbuster's own SEC filings disclosed the cost: $250 to $300 million in foregone operating income in 2005 alone, plus $50 million in advertising. Combined with the online investment, the digital pivot was burning through roughly $400 million. Operating income had already fallen 44% in 2004. The strategic logic was correct. The cash was gone. Carl Icahn arrived in early 2005, bought nearly 10 million shares, called Antioco's compensation unconscionable, and waged a proxy war that won him 3 board seats. On July 2, 2007, the board replaced Antioco with former 7-Eleven CEO James Keyes. Keyes doubled down on physical stores and cut the digital investment that might have saved the brand. Among his early moves was restoring the late fees Antioco had eliminated. Icahn later called Blockbuster the worst investment I ever made, and dumped his shares before the bankruptcy filing. September 23, 2010. Chapter 11. Approximately $1 billion in debt. The company that had killed 4,100 independents in 3 years took 12 years to die. Dish Network won the bankruptcy auction in April 2011 for roughly $320 million. At acquisition, Blockbuster had about 1,700 stores. Dish announced it would keep 500. In January 2014, it closed the remaining 300 corporate-owned locations. The chain that had opened a store every day took 29 years to disappear. What it left behind was a single franchise storefront in Bend, Oregon. Chapter 9. The Tombstone with a Popcorn Machine. The Bend store was opened by Ken and Debbie Tischer in 1992 as the second location of their independent chain Pacific Video. Tischer specifically wanted a mom-and-pop store. They converted to a Blockbuster franchise in 2000. Sandy Harding has been general manager since 2004. The store became the last Blockbuster in the United States in July 2018 and the last in the world by 2019. Harding told a local reporter when she learned the last Australian location had closed. "I had no idea. I wondered which one of us was going to hold out the longest." About 80% of the store's revenue now comes from merchandise, t-shirts, mugs, bumper stickers. It carries roughly 1,200 titles. It has about 4,000 regular members. In October 2025, the store celebrated Blockbuster's 40th anniversary with a parking lot block party. A local paper described Harding in a throwback jean jacket, making the lot feel like something you could stumble across in 1985 or 2085. It is a museum that charges admission in the form of a rental. But the Bend store isn't the real survivor story. The independents that outlasted Blockbuster, almost without exception, are the ones that removed the profit motive entirely. Scarecrow Video in Seattle was donated to a nonprofit by its owners in October 2014, with a Kickstarter exceeding $100,000. It now holds more than 148,000 titles. In January 2026, the archive purchased the property outright for $5.5 million. Executive Director Kate Barr: "We view ourselves as a cultural museum and a living archive. Vidiots in Los Angeles, founded in 1985, went nonprofit in 2013, closed in 2017, and reopened in June 2023 at the historic 1929 Eagle Theater in Eagle Rock after a $2 million renovation, with a 271-seat theater, a bar, and 60 to 70,000 rental titles. Founding members include Ryan Johnson, Elijah Wood, and Patton Oswalt. Movie Madness in Portland was sold to the Hollywood Theater nonprofit in 2018 for $250,000, less than half its appraised value. Clark's reasoning was simple. I wanted the right people to take over Movie Madness and keep it the way I started it. I will live on because the store is who I am. Kim's Video, after a 12-year, 9,000-mile odyssey to Sicily, where a mayor had pledged a public archive that never materialized, and a reporter found the collection boxed up in a dingy storage space, was partially rescued by Alamo Drafthouse founder Tim League, who brought 20,000 titles back to a small space in Lower Manhattan in April 2022 with free 5-day rentals. League's verdict: nobody died. Kim's Video will live forever. Beyond Video in Baltimore opened in 2018 by a volunteer collective after Video Americane's 2014 closure. 39,000 titles. 4-star video cooperative in Madison sold to its employees in 2014. The pattern is consistent. The for-profit independent video store, as a category, did not survive. What survived is a small constellation of cultural institutions that look like video stores and function as community archives, organizations that had to remove the profit motive entirely to do what 30,000 American small businesses once did at scale for money on Friday nights. Chapter 10. What the Wall Going Dark actually meant. When Blockbuster killed an independent video store, the neighborhood didn't just lose a place to rent movies. It lost several things at once, and most of them were invisible until they were gone. It lost a curation infrastructure, the clerk who pressed Rashomon into a teenager's hand, the shelf talker card recommending an obscure Iranian film. Martin Scorsese wrote that cinema was being systematically devalued, sidelined, demeaned, and reduced to its lowest common denominator: content. He called curation an act of generosity. Algorithms optimized toward what's already proven. The clerk at the independent video store recommended what he loved. Kim's Video alone offered 55,000 titles, more than any single streaming service offers today. It lost a third place. The sociologist Ray Oldenburg defined third places in 1989 as informal gathering spots between home and work, anchors of community life. The independent video store was exactly this, a neighborhood spot where you ran into classmates, neighbors, your high school history teacher. Oldenburg himself observed that chain establishments were less effective third places than local, independently owned ones. The Blockbuster model by design replaced a relationship with a transaction. It lost a financial engine for independent and foreign film. The rental and sell-through revenues from Sundance titles, foreign imports, and direct-to-video genre product underwrote an entire stratum of production that streaming economics have never replicated. Tom Roston's I Lost It at the Video Store argues these stores were an irreplaceable part of the independent film movement of the 80s and 90s. When the stores vanished, a revenue stream that had kept small filmmakers solvent vanished with them, and it lost a discovery mechanism that no technology has replaced. Browsing the foreign section because the new release wall was picked clean, picking up a tape because the cover art was strange, wandering into a genre you'd never tried because a clerk said, "Trust me on this one?" Algorithmic recommendation by mathematical design produces convergence. It pushes you toward what people like you already watch. The video store produced divergence. It pushed you toward what you'd never heard of. The collapse of the American independent video store is usually narrated as a technology story. Streaming killed physical media. The future arrived. The past couldn't adapt. That isn't what happened. What happened was a corporate power story made possible by a regulatory abdication executed via contract structures most consumers never knew existed. 31,000 specialty stores became a handful of nonprofits because Hollywood studios decided, beginning in 1997, to give one retailer access to inventory at a fraction of the wholesale price they charged everyone else. Federal antitrust enforcers, holding a law that arguably prohibited exactly this, chose not to enforce it. The chain that benefited most didn't innovate, it leveraged. And the same instincts that made it willing to destroy 20-year-old family businesses, the contempt for fair competition, the refusal to share value, the preference for control over partnership, made it constitutionally incapable of surviving the next disruption. The last Blockbuster in Bend, Oregon is sometimes treated as a poignant survivor. It's more accurate to call it a tombstone with a popcorn machine. The actual surviving heirs of the independent video store tradition are the nonprofits, Scarecrow, Vidiots, Movie Madness, Beyond Video, Kim's at the Alamo Drafthouse. That had to give up on making money to do what 30,000 stores once did as a matter of course. That's what was lost. Not the movies. Movies are more abundant and more accessible than they've ever been. What was lost was a specific architecture of cultural life, human curation at neighborhood scale, physical browsing as a path to films no algorithm will surface, the clerk who knew your name, your kid's name, and what your mother would actually watch, the small business owner who balanced the books on a $75 cassette and a $4 rental and somehow kept the lights on through sheer stubbornness and love of the work, the villain, against the assumption baked into a quarter century of think pieces, was not the technology. The villain wore a blue and yellow polo shirt and asked if you'd like to add resineds for $1. If you spent Friday nights in one of those stores, if you remember the carpet, the popcorn machine, the clerk who changed what you thought a movie could be, I'd like to hear about it. Which store was yours? What did they put in your hands that you never would have found on your own? That's the history that doesn't show up in the business books, and it's worth preserving, while the people who lived it are still around to tell it.